Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradari. Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamunatiravana Chari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradari. Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tiravana Chari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradari. Paramahamsa Parivajikacharya Ashtotra Shatashish Maharaj Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivajikacharya Ashtotra Shatashish Maharaj Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavarinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Sikaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaura Bhaktivinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shamakund Radha Kund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Navadvip Dham Ki Jai. Ganga Yamuna Maya Ki Jai. Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories of the assembled devotees. All glories of the assembled devotees. Glories of the assembled devotees. All glories of Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, titled The Creative Impetus, chapter, which chapter are we on again? 19. Chapter 19. Text 16, 5:19:16. Okay. So, what should we do in this case?
Bharate Pyasmin Varshe Sadichailaha Sandhi Bhavo Malayo Mangala Prasto Mainakas Tikuta Rishabha Kutakaha Kolaka Sadyo Devagirir Rishyamuka Sri Shailo Venkato Mahindro Varidaro Vindhya Shuktiman Rikshagiri Pariyatro Dronas Chittakuto Govardhano Raivatakaha Kakubo Nilo Gokamukha Indrakila Kamagiri Iti Chanye Cha Shatasahasasha Sailas Tesham Nitamba Prabha Vanadhananjascha Sant Yasankyataha.
Translation. Commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Commentary will be coming soon. Not on this verse, but next couple of verses. In the tract of land known as Bharatvarsha, as in Ilavrita-varsha, there are many mountains and rivers. Some of the mountains are known as Malaya, Mangalaprastha, Mainaka, Trikuta, Rishabha, Kutaka, Kolaka, Saya, Devagiri, Rishamukha, Sri Shaila, Venkata, Mahendra, Varidhara, Vindhya, Shuktiman, Rikshagiri, Pari Yatra, Drona, Chitrakoot, Govardhan, Raivataka, Kukuba, Nila, Gokamukha, Indra, Kila, and Kamagiri. Does anyone recognize any of those? Govardhan? Okay, Govardhan and Chitrakoot. Raivata? Raivata. Where's that Raivata here? Okay, Govardhan, Raivata. Raivataka. All right, so we recognize a few of them. Besides these, there are many other hills with many large and small rivers flowing from their slopes. Text 17 and 18. Two of the rivers, the Brahmaputra and Shona, are called Nadas, or main rivers. These are other great rivers that are very important, or prominent. Chandravasa, Tamraparni, Avatoda, Kritamala, Vaihayasi, Kavari, Veni, Payasvini, Sharkaravarta, Tungabhadra, Krishnavenya, Bhimarati, Godavari, Nirvindya, Payushoni, Tapi, Reva, Surasa, Narmada, Charmandvati, Mahanadi, Vedasmriti, Rishikula, Trisamya, Sama, Kaushiki, Mandakini, Yamuna, Saraswati, Drishtadvati, Gomati, Sarayu, Rodasvati, Saptavati, Sushoma, Shatadru, Chandrabhaga, Marudridha, Vitasta, Asikni, and Vishva. Anyone recognize any of those? Lots? Okay. Got the Yamuna, Saraswati. Yeah. The inhabitants of Bharatvarsha are purified because they always remember these rivers. Sometimes they chant the names of these rivers as mantras. Sometimes they go directly to the rivers to touch them and bathe in them. Thus the inhabitants of Bharatvarsha become purified. Purport. All these rivers are transcendental, therefore one can be purified by remembering them, touching them, or bathing in them. This practice is still going on. Text 19. The people who take birth in this tract of land are divided according to the qualities of material nature, the mode of goodness, sattvagun, passion, rajagun, and ignorance, tamagun. Some of them are born as exalted personalities, some are ordinary human beings, and some are extremely abominable. For in Bharatvarsha, one takes birth exactly according to one's past karma. If one's position is ascertained by a bona fide spiritual master, and one is properly trained to engage in the service of Lord Vishnu, according to the four social order divisions, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, and the four spiritual divisions, Brahmachari, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, and Sannyas, one's life becomes perfect. Purport. For further information, one should refer to Bhagavad Gita 14:18 and 18:42 through 45. Srila Ramanujacharya writes in his book, Vedanta Sangraha, Evam Vidha Para Bhakti Sarupa Jnana Vishesha Yot Padaka Purvoktaha. And it goes on for a while. Quoting from the Vishnu Purana 389, the great sage Parashara Muni has recommended, Varnashrama-dharma Purushena Para Puman Vishnu Aradite Panta Nanyat Tashakaranam. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Vishnu, is worshipped by the proper execution of prescribed duties in the system of Varna and Ashram. There is no other way to satisfy the Lord. In the land of Bharatvarsha, the institution of Varnashrama-dharma may be easily adopted. At the present moment, certain demoniac sections of the population of Bharatvarsha are disregarding the system of Varnashrama-dharma. Because there is no institution to teach people how to become Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras, or Brahmacharis, Grihastas, Vanaprasthas, and Sannyasis, these demons want a classless society. This is resulting in chaotic conditions. In the name of secular government, unqualified people are taking the supreme governmental posts. No one is being trained to act according to the principles of Varnashram-dharma, and thus people are becoming increasingly degraded and are heading in the direction of animal life. The real aim of life is liberation, but unfortunately the opportunity for liberation is being denied to people in general, and therefore their human lives are being spoiled. The Krishna consciousness movement, however, is being propagated all over the world to reestablish the Varnashram-dharma system, and thus save human society from gliding down to hellish life. Om Ganatividandasya Gananchana Shlakaya Chakshudan Mahatamena Tasmai Shigriveda Mahamakam Kiridvachalam Pangam Langategrim Yakripatamaham Vande Shigurun Diritarinam Vancha Kapadrubishta Kripa Sindhabevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhanityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. I think it's in the staircase. Hare Krishna. So, in the last shloka we just read, Srila Prabhupada said, for more information, one should refer to Bhagavad Gita, chapter 14, text 18. And this particular verse, Urdvam gachanti sattvasta madhya tishtanti rajasa jaganya gunavrittasta ado ganchanti tamasa. Anyone recognize that one? Any of the younger devotees recognize that one? Prabhupada quote it. Udvam gachanti sattvasta madhya tishtanti rajasa. This is, those situated in the mode of goodness gradually go upward to the higher planets. Those in the mode of passion live on the earthly planets, and those in the abominable mode of ignorance go down to the hellish worlds. So Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport that there's he expands on this point, that if people are living a life in the mode of goodness, then they'll go upwards to heavenly planets. And if they're living the abominable life of the mode of ignorance, he says this is very, very risky. It's the lowest quality material nature. Beneath the human level, there are 8 million species of life, birds, beasts, reptiles. And according to the development of the mode of ignorance, people are brought down to these abominable conditions. The word tamasa is very significant. Tamasa indicates those who stay continuously in the mode of ignorance without rising to a higher mode. Their future is very dark. There's an opportunity for men in the mode of ignorance and passion to be elevated to the mode of goodness, and that system is called Krishna consciousness. But one who does not take advantage of this opportunity will certainly continue in the lower modes. So life is very dark. Their future is very dark. So we see that modern society, in which Srila Prabhupada was very, very critical of, he didn't agree with most of their policies. There might be some things, but most of them he didn't agree with. And aside from not agreeing with them, he spoke out against them. Because one thing is, they say silence. If you stay silent, of course not every rule is absolute, but generally if you stay silent, that's a form of agreeing. Oh, I agree. So, but Srila Prabhupada was anything but silent. He was speaking a lot. That was his main activity, actually, speaking, writing. Inspiring devotees to surrender their lives to Krishna. And people would become very angry with Srila Prabhupada about speaking out against people, because if you analyze it, just even now, like analyze, we're talking, you could say gurus, the general guru image, just analyze it. You don't, if you go to whatever, this society, that society, this society, that society, this society, that society, around the general societies in which there's gurus, they don't really do that. And they weren't really doing that in the past. Of course, you had, right, the Mayavadis of India, the real Mayavadis of India, which Srila Prabhupada said, the sannyasis, the impersonalists, the Mayavadi impersonalists, said that devotees should even offer obeisances to them. Interesting point, because you think all those Mayavadis, right? But he said they should offer obeisances for the principle of respecting, because if they're actually real sannyasis, they're actually renounced. Anyways, side point. But there was some debating and things like that. But if you analyze, no one would really speak out like Srila Prabhupada would speak out against others. Sometimes using their names, sometimes not using their names. But it's interesting because even if you don't use the person's name, everybody knows who you're talking about. Interesting point. Although you don't say their name, everybody knows. But like I mentioned this some time ago, Satsrup Das Goswami, he wanted to write a book about the different gurus and how they're wrong and bogus. And then Srila Prabhupada said, oh, that's not a good idea. You shouldn't do that. He said Prabhupada said, if you hit a skunk, your hand will smell. So, don't do it. So, but he would speak out. And I was just reading that this devotee, Jagat Purush Prabhu, he served for many years in Bombay and Juhu as a cook. And he said that he was on a morning walk one time with Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada was talking with Dr. Patel. And they had an interesting relationship, Dr. Patel and Srila Prabhupada. So Srila Prabhupada was criticizing some very famous person of recent history. And Dr. Patel was saying, Swami, if you don't agree with their philosophy, just leave them alone. You do your thing, and they'll do their thing. Just leave them alone. Why do you have to be so critical? And that's the general, I think it's heightened, at least speaking from the center of the universe, America. It's heightened in America. Of course, who knows there's a lot going on. It's a big world out there, actually. It's not. I'm joking, the center of the universe is America, but it's a big world out there. But at least in America, this idea is heightened that just let people do. If someone wants to go to hell, just let them do it. So anyways, Srila Prabhupada responded, and he said, if I'm doing a surgical operation on a patient, and somebody comes in and starts to cut my patient, he said, am I just going to sit there and allow someone to cut my patient? And then Srila Prabhupada said, no. He said, no, I'm not. He'll say, get out, rascal. No, leave. You're cutting my patient. And then Dr. Patel, he was saying he went on to anyways. So Jagat Purush Prabhu was saying that Prabhupada was very strong about this. He wouldn't just let let ignorance reign supreme. He didn't want people to be in the mode of ignorance and just future life is very dark. He didn't want that. So how does this relate to what we're speaking about today? It relates because we also should not just be quiet and peaceful. We should try our best to give spiritual knowledge, right? Transcendental book distribution. We should try to give knowledge this way, that way, somehow or other. And aside from distributing books, for example, we should also know the philosophy very well. Therefore, we have to study. Therefore, we have to attend classes. Therefore, we have to think about it, contemplate, meditate, try to apply this knowledge in our lives. Like recently, one of our brahmacharis here, they finished the Srimad Bhagavatam reading. Very good. So it's a step towards being versed in the philosophy, just to read, to finish books, right, beginning to end. Why? Because why do we have to? When I say it's a must, we have to distribute knowledge. It means that it's actually our way of repaying the debt to Srila Prabhupada, repaying the debt to our spiritual master. This is the way we have to repay the debt. Just like one Srila Prabhupada disciple, a guru, one Swami, one of his disciples were walking in, and his disciple was carrying a check and giving to his guru, right? Dakshina, it's called dakshina. So then the guru, he said, "Oh no, I don't want that check." He said, he pointed to his heart. He said, I want your heart. Means, I want you to surrender to Krishna. I want you to surrender your life to the spreading of Krishna consciousness. This is mentioned in the 11th canto. Krishna speaking to Uddhava. He says, Dakshina Jnana Sandeshaha, which means that Srila Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur, it's mentioned in the purport of this particular verse that the way we repay the debt to the spiritual master is to teach others what he has taught us. That's real dakshina. To give jnana, to give knowledge, to give wisdom. Not just to become initiated and not give knowledge. We have to give knowledge. And in the purport, it's explained, Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur explains that dakshina is not, the spiritual master, just, the real dakshina to the guru is not cloth, because that's common. Guru Maharaj, I got you some nice cloth. It's a nice gift, right? Especially when you have too holy of kirtas or dhotis, which in the case I do. I'm sure some of you have noticed that. My holy dhotis and kirtas, but it's a nice gift. So sometimes, the disciple or student will give the teacher some cloth. Nice gift. Hanumak Prashak Swami, he says, somehow or other, he says, I'm a sannyasi. And he says, I get so many pairs of socks. It's just like an overload of socks. Disciples and friends, and people giving him socks. Maharaj wants some socks. He also says that whenever he travels, the devotees are always trying to serve him pizza. It's like, oh, Maharaj is here, let's have some pizza, and give him some socks, right? Anyways. So all right, cloth is there. Or what else? Some wealth, right? Oh, here, Guru Maharaj, here's some wealth, here's some cloth. What other things? Common things. Can you think of anything else?
Sweaters.
Yeah, sweaters, socks, watch, wealth, cloth, place to stay. I can't read my handwriting. Okay. So, gifts. Yeah, rings. Sometimes it's actually hard to get gifts for the spiritual master because, you know, you think everybody's giving him socks and sweat. He's already got enough socks and sweaters, and what are you supposed to give him? So actually, it just makes sense from a practical point of view. Well, he has everything, so what can I do? All I could do is try to distribute knowledge, right? Just from a practical point of view, it makes sense. Although there might be things that you could get the spiritual master. For example, sorry to use myself as an example, but I remember seeing my Guru Maharaj, he had these cards, like his own cards with his name and his contact and everything. And I said, I think we could make better cards than this, you know, graphic, from a graphic design point of view, and just, it was like a generic card. So Bhishma, Dev, and myself, we spent a long time going back and forth on the phone and this and that. We're designing the card, you know, because when you're designing something, like a card or whatever it might be, everything matters, you know, where the line ends, where it begins, where's the picture, if it needs to go up like a half inch or whatever. Everything matters. So we're going back and forth a lot. So eventually we came up with this nice card. It's a picture of Srila Prabhupada and him in the background, famous picture. And I presented those cards to him. So there may be some things we could get. That we could also think of that. But real thing, the most important thing is Dakshina Jnana Sandesha, to distribute or to share knowledge. And this is how we repay the debt to the spiritual master. And it's a service, it's an opportunity that will never, there'll always be customers. Means that there'll always be people to give knowledge to in the material world. Like if you go to Balboa Park for the next 50 years, every day, you always find somebody new to give spiritual knowledge to, somebody. So it's great, right? Like Srila Prabhupada said, or at least, anyways, there's no, right, unemployment problems within the Hare Krishna movement. There's always pots to wash, there's always deity worship to do, there's always books to distribute, there's always someone to talk to about Krishna consciousness. So that's the idea, to do that. Because in the mode of ignorance, it's very, it's actually scary. I'm infallible afterwards. Excuse me, not infallible. I meant to say, see, that was a mistake. I'm fallible after all. I got the wrong Bhagavatam. Can somebody look up this particular verse? It's 10th canto, chapter 40, text 25, 10:40:25. And if you could please just hand me the... Okay. So this is Akura in the Srimad Bhagavatam 10th canto, and he is explaining the state of one in ignorance, which practically really, for the most part, is everyone. So here it is. Anityanatma dukeshu viparya materyaham Dvandvaramas tamo vishto najane tatmana priyam. Thus mistaking the temporary for the eternal, they're thinking that the temporary is eternal. Oh, it's going to last forever. My body for myself. They think, oh, this body's me. And sources of misery for sources of happiness. There is no bliss in the material world. The only bliss is, well, there is, materially speaking, there is no bliss materially in the material world. It's just non-existent. It's not there. And even if you say there's something there, in comparison to transcendental happiness, it is hellish actually. It's just, it's like, for example, like Srila Prabhupada had this disciple. The bliss of the material world is here as mentioned by Srila Prabhupada in this particular pastime I'm about to say. That Prabhupada, he initiated one devotee, Bhavananda. So bhava means, right, ecstasy, and bhava means like material existence. So he didn't initiate him Bhavananda, Bhavananda. He initiated him Bhavananda, right? Which that means the bliss of the material world. So this devotee was thinking, why did Srila Prabhupada give me the name, the bliss of the material world? What does that mean? So he asked Srila Prabhupada, what does that mean? Srila Prabhupada said, yes, the bliss of the material world. What is that bliss of the material world? The bliss of the material world is giving Krishna consciousness to others, spiritual knowledge to others, or preaching, teaching, educating people. That is the bliss of the material world. Aside from that, I mean, people may try to get bliss this way, that way, so many different ways. But it is not bliss. As Akrura says here, they're actually sources of misery. Sources of misery for sources of happiness. I have tried to take pleasure in material dualities. Covered in this way by ignorance, I could not recognize you as the real object of my love. So people, they can't recognize Krishna as object of the love because they're taking the temporary as eternal, the body for the self, sources of misery as sources of happiness, taking pleasure in the material dualities, and then they're covered in ignorance, so they can't see Krishna. So the teaching of Krishna consciousness, it will teach people that what is temporary, what is eternal, who we are, what is our identity. What's the real source of happiness and misery? How to become transcendental to this idea of trying to enjoy the material dualities. In other words, someone would be situated in knowledge, which is the best gift we could give anyone, actually. Like, who is going to save the world? The UN? No. Who? No. Red Cross? No. Who's going to save the world? Means we may feed people and clothe people and so-called protect people. But ultimately, if they remain in ignorance, what type of help is that? Prabhupada would say, it's like helping a drowning man in the ocean. Like there's a man who drowned recently. It's a big news in San Diego. Not a man, it was a boy, just graduated high school. Now imagine if the boy was drowning and the helicopter went out there and they went down there and they just grabbed his shirt and let the guy drown, right? So Prabhupada said this is what people are doing, all this. It's just like saving the dress of a drowning man. And despite all these people's hard endeavors to help people, still people are suffering. And the main suffering is this ignorance. That's a main cause. And even if you were to clothe these people and feed them and etc., if you don't train them how to be human beings, proper human beings, means God-conscious human beings, then amongst themselves, there's going to be so many issues still, right? Fighting, quarreling, wars. Like there's a lot of war going on. And even the people, here you go, thank you. And even the people who help, who are trying to help, many of them are just not qualified to do that. Who knows what type of motives are going on in their mind, but they're just clearly not qualified to help, even materially. And that's the problem. On the material side, you have a bunch of unqualified helpers. And then on the spiritual side, you also have a bunch of unqualified people. It's a problem because people need help. And if the so-called helpers are just cheating people, it's a big problem. Like these, not all of them, but a good number of them, a lot of them. These UN peacemakers, right? Actually, peace, what are they called? Keepers? Yeah, peacekeepers. Huge problem. They're supposed to be helping people materially. You know, they're not helping people spiritually. But they're supposed to be helping them materially, but they're not even doing that properly. They're actually abusing people. Like within the Congo, a huge, UN peacemaker, they're all flying in from all over the world. It's a huge percentage of abuse, rape towards women, and abuse towards women and children from these guys, peacemakers. Thousands of cases, and you could say that this is a failure of this idea, right? What is it called? Humanism. It's a failure of humanism, right? Means there's no God. We could be good people without God. No, you can't. It's just, why? Because it, like there was one quote that I said recently about man or woman with religion is imperfect, right? There's so many people, there's problems, right? People. But what man with God or woman with God is imperfect. What to speak of without God? It means that the human, especially in Kali Yuga, the human weakness is so, we're so susceptible to weakness that without God, it's just we can't control. We cannot control. There's no way of control. And you see that in history. Where are the examples of humans controlling their vanity, their pride, their anger, their lust, their desire to dominate and exploit and enjoy this material world without religion? I mean, you see it happens in religion too, but it's happening outside of religion in a huge way. So to be in a position in which we could help and then not to help, that's very bad. And to be in a position to help and we abuse, that's worse. So we could look at this as in the spiritual sense that we're in a position where we could help a lot of people, like it or not. Yadi Dekita Ka Krishna Badesh, right? Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, on my order, you become a guru and you try to liberate the land. So, What is the first line? Yeah, whoever you meet, wherever you go, try to teach them about Krishna, the messages of the Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, and this way become a guru and try to liberate the land. So that is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mandate, his order, and to be followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we have to accept that. And we should just accept that we are in a position to help people. You might say, oh, I'm fallen, I'm this, that, right? I can't do it, can't. Don't want to, unqualified. Well, too bad. In wartime, when there's emergency, even if we say that we're unqualified, if there's emergency, somebody has to be put in the position, right, of leadership or, anyways. So we are in a position to help, and therefore we should. And being in the position of help, we should definitely not, we have to be very, very careful not to harm others while we're in that position. So this is the need the need of this world at this particular point in time is the need of people to become, to accept the responsibility of giving knowledge to others. That's the great need, and for people to become qualified. And or else the future is very dark. The future of people is very dark. Remove all the devotees off the planet, and then what does it become? It's very dark. That's what happens, right? With the continuation of Kali Yuga, eventually the devotees start leaving, and then it just becomes a complete. It's just, hellscape. Yeah, hellscape. So we have to try our best, and that means it's different for everyone. I mean, you have Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, Shudras, Brahmacharis, Grihastas, Vanaprasthas, Sannyasis. We're all meant to work together to help the situation for Varnashrama-dharma. But the main thing is to educate people, to set up systems in which when people come, they become educated. Also, from a young point, from the children, it's also very important to educate the children. Like these other sampradayas, they educate, for example, young boys from a very early age, and they actually train them as sannyasis based on their astrology and so on. And these people become very powerful. Imagine all this training for many, many years. It's not that you just got trained for a few years but he was training for many, many years. And accidents happen. Hope that wasn't our car. So this point of training is very important because if we're able to train people from a very young age, then and if they follow and continue, then they could be great forces of good in the world. Just like you don't send a bunch of, you don't send a bunch of hippies out on the battlefield, right? Who are all stoned up and don't want anything to do with the war. Right, that was the problem. Anyways, you don't send them out on the battlefield. Why? They're just not going to do a good job, right? But you have to send out trained, right, persons. So the more we could be trained, the more we could train others, the more that there could be a chance of helping more people and being forces of good. rather than. Okay, you have something, Devaretta, Prabhu?
So, first point, somewhere in the class you were mentioning being unqualified. It reminded me of what my Guru Maharaj says. He says it's illegal to consider oneself permanently unqualified.
Nice.
And then the second, I have a question actually. So we see these Madhvacharya sannyasi boys who are trained from an early age. And then even if you read the Bhaktisiddhanta Vaibhav, the very end of it, you know, they give that huge list of biographies of some of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's disciples. I mean, materially and spiritually speaking, they're very qualified individuals. Yeah. But then you see who spread Krishna consciousness around the world were Prabhupada's disciples who were coming from a very untrained, unregulated background, didn't know proper cleanliness standards, didn't know proper etiquettes for interacting with people, didn't really know the philosophy so much. Mm-hmm. But they were the ones that were empowered to spread Krishna consciousness around the world. So despite the fact training can be there, it doesn't seem like it's the end-all and be-all.
Yeah.
And one point that some devotees make about the Mayapur Gurukul is they're trained in a particular way, but you see, like, after they graduate, some of them are becoming preachers, but a lot of them, they taper off. Mm-hmm. So how do we kind of understand this dichotomy and this, how do we reconcile it?
Yeah. Okay. Well, of course, we have to be empowered to spread Krishna consciousness, and Srila Prabhupada empowered his disciples. They were running off of his empowerment and his inspiration. I mean, Srila Prabhupada was not just, some guru. He was, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's, right, sergeant, and it's a very most special personality. So it was a very most rare personality to grace this planet, and based on his empowerment from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he empowered so many others, despite them not knowing the philosophy. They knew to a degree, but despite some of their imperfections, still they had that empowerment. And you see, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's disciples, they're very qualified materially and spiritually, and of course not all of them. Of course you have that whole break of the Gaudiya Math, but there were so many great devotees in that Gaudiya Math, and it's not that just because the Gaudiya Math disintegrated, and not that all of them were like in Maya or something. There were so many great devotees who continued and who, started their own projects and did a lot, helped a lot of people. But in terms of being trained and not being trained, I mean, Srila Prabhupada would mention it often in his letters and a lot of his letters that he wants the devotees to be trained in culture and etiquette and education, because ultimately we're meant to be representing him, so we have to be like him as much as possible. That's what it means to represent someone. It's not like somebody, you go and you meet somebody and you say, yeah, I'm a follower of Srila Prabhupada, and they're like, oh, really? You're a follower of Prabhupada? Like, you don't really look like it, you don't act like it, you don't talk like it. You don't remind me of him at all. I mean, it's not that we don't imitate him, obviously, but we have to follow him as the Charya, and that should be seen in our activities, in our behavior, and how we speak, and how we treat people. Because we're supposed to be representing him. Also the Guru, our own spiritual master. That's the tough thing about having disciples or being a guru, one of the tough things is that the disciples, they could represent you properly or not, but we're supposed to represent them properly. And therefore, if someone is educated and trained and all these different aspects, then it means practically that they're becoming more and more like him to the degree they can be. We can't become Prabhupada, obviously, but we could become Prabhupada-like to some degree. So that's the idea. In terms of the Mayapur Gurukul and training them, it's not necessarily that everyone who gets trained as a devotee or as a young boy in a Gurukul necessarily has to be some big preacher. There's many devotees who will live quiet, peaceful lives out of farm communities, for example. But this is also preaching. They're demonstrating to people how to live a peaceful, happy life. Like the new Rajadam, right, in Hungary. They could all move out of there, go to the cities and preach, but they're demonstrating to people in general, devotees and people in general, how to live a happy, peaceful life in Krishna consciousness. So there's nothing wrong with that. So just because Mayapur Gurukul may not be, pumping out a bunch of, world preachers or something, you could say the fruit of their education at Mayapur Gurukul or any Gurukul is that the children are devotees. Means they have deep faith in Krishna consciousness. They follow the processes of Krishna consciousness. They're a proper representative of Srila Prabhupada. They're a perfect gentleman. Like Srila Prabhupada said, how will you know, or somebody asked Prabhupada, how will you know my disciples? Oh, he'll be a perfect gentleman, or a lady, right? He said gentleman, but could expand, to lady, but perfect gentleman. So that's the education that's supposed to train someone to reach that stage. Now, whether they become world preachers, maybe, whether they move to a farm, whether they, as long as they, continue in the process of Krishna consciousness, it's not a failure. And we have some practical points here from Vaikuntha Prabhu because his son was in the Gurukul for many years in Mayapur, so he could tell us some on the ground.
I appreciated your answer very much, and I just wanted to add, if it's okay, this is an observation, this is a big topic, and I'll just give a very short summary of it, but a lot of the kids there are second generation, and a lot of us are first generation, right? And one thing you can kind of notice is we kind of found Krishna and dive into it in that way. They kind of grow into feeling like Krishna is a part of their life, and they have to kind of find their life. It might sound a little funny, but it's like it's a more slow ripening fruit, is my observation in a lot of cases. And as Balaram was explaining, Gurukul is really about character development and about teaching them to be a devotee of Krishna and to really have that sense that I'm a devotee of Krishna. Krishna will maintain us, Krishna will protect us, we're meant to serve Krishna. Like one of the principal things about Gurukula, with boys in particular, is that we have this kind of Purusha Bhav, and that has to be converted to like, I'm a servant, because otherwise, everybody's running around trying to be the enjoyer. Doesn't work very well. That's the whole material world. But the boys are trained to become servants of Guru, servants of Krishna. And they're meant to then graduate from Gurukula and go out and find their life according to who they're supposed to be. Like one time, Gyanagamya Prabhu, he passed away now, but nice devotee. He was in Mayapur the last few years of his life, and he asked, at the time Bhakti Raj was running the Gurukul, that, are we going to see a lot of world preachers, coming out of Gurukul, or why aren't we seeing, And Raj explained, there's one nice devotee, Chandrasekhar, who's preaching in China. I think he's a GBC. There are some examples like that. of course, but he said, but the movement also needs good followers. We need good leaders, but we also need good followers. And good followers, as Balaram was explaining, are people that are trained to be a devotee, and whatever their varna is, whatever their ashram is, whatever their natural way of life is going to be, they'll actually do that in a very exemplary Krishna-conscious way, which is a very deep level of preaching, as Balaram was explaining. So it's a bit more gradual. Like our son was a student for 7 years. He was a teacher for 3 years after that. And right now he's in college in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And there's very little devotee association there, but he's constantly in touch with all his devotee friends. They have a long-term vision of trying to implement Krishna-conscious education in the West. It's one of the reasons why he's in college. He has another friend who's doing the same thing. He's just spent years getting a degree. He taught in a Krishna-conscious day school in America for 2 years. Now he just got accepted to be a Secret Service guy. So, I'm just saying, they have very long-term trajectories, but it's not like they're throwing Krishna consciousness out the window. Rather, they're trying to figure out their life and maintain their Krishna consciousness and ultimately use the positions that they attain in this world for Krishna service. So anyway, just wanted to share that perspective.
Yeah, even if you look at it like traditionally, Vaishyas and Shudras and Kshatriyas, and they're all serving in different ways, but it's not that, just traditionally speaking, it's not that they were, the Shudras were engaged in their work, right? The Kshatriyas were managing things. Vaishyas, right, protecting cows and agriculture, this and that. And the Brahmins were, traveling and preaching as whatever sannyasis and so on. Radhesham Prabhu told me something very interesting. I forgot the numbers, but he said it like in a village of 1,000 people, I think he said. Anyways, we have to talk to him about that. He said it was like 3 Brahmins. I was like, wow, that's not very much. Yeah, Brahmins are very small. What you're saying in a village, there's in comparison to how many people there are, it's quite small. So let's say somebody, they're at the Gurukul, they've been educated in humility and service to the Guru and to Krishna, and they learn, how to become a devotee, right? They're trained as a devotee. But, maybe they just want to go to a farm and, right, work the fields or whatever. And there's so many things they could do. But out of those, you might get some preachers, as we kind of generally think of them. You have something, Raj?
Yes, I do, if you don't mind.
Last question, Raj.
Thank you. When you were saying that there's many people out there in the Maya world that can always be saved, it reminded me of a Bible quote that says the harvest is plenty, but the laborers are few. In the sense, there's always going to be people that you got to save, but it's us to take the role and to be empowered to do so.
The harvest is plenty, but the laborers are few. Yeah. There's so much. They actually have a problem with that, I think, and one devotee was telling me, somewhere in Europe, the Croatia, Suvarna Bindu Prabhu was telling me, he said that there's so many olives, like people have a bunch of olive trees. We think of olives like, oh, great, olives, and what of olive oil or whatever. But he said there's so many olives that there's just so much, it's just going rotten, because there's not enough people to, like you said, so.
And the second note is you said peacekeepers and other soldiers who are meant to protect and save, they're always the ones doing corrupt stuff. It's in human nature that wherever there's a position, there's heroes and people that want to save the world that go into the soldier stuff, but there's also psychopaths and killers that blend inside these organizations so they can do what they need to do.
I was thinking about that because, who knows what, there's so much going on in people's minds, so who knows? People may specifically desire and work towards entering a particular position just so they could abuse, like have easy targets. It's like you got like a planned murderer. It's not like it wasn't just by accident. He planned it out very carefully. So people could use their demoniac brains to do such things.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's true. And on that note, it also works in the spiritual world, I found, that in the religious organization, any organization, it's always the narcissist or the egotist that hides among spiritual stuff, and they're always the most outspoken, the most friendly, so they fool the most amount of people.
Yeah, it's anyways, it's an interesting point because, like, as a Diksha guru, if one is serving in that capacity, means, you know, having disciples and so on, they have to be very humble and very Krishna conscious and very tolerant and you know, very sober in order to do that service, or else they shouldn't be doing that service. But you see that externally, what they receive externally, it would be very attractive to a narcissistic person, because it's like, oh, the narcissist seeing, wow, he's getting a lot of, you know, gifts, a lot of praise, a lot of attention, a lot of, you know, getting everything. So, oh, okay, let me. Of course, for a narcissist to enter a position of a Diksha guru, that's just insanity. But you could see how it could be, it is attractive to them.
I think that's why, as you mentioned, Prabhupada was always outspoken and called out other gurus. Those that can see the difference, because most people can't. It's their role to make sure others don't falsely follow them. That's why you got to speak out and make sure you cut that off, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Chat. Okay, great. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Tatadus.